Sometimes the road signs lie, Part 2. Melanie was totally out by the time I entered the room. She couldn't have been there for long, but I saw that Ruthie had set her up nicely with a nest of pillows in all the right places, and it looked like this might be the first night in weeks that she got a decent night's sleep. I undressed down to my boxers and slid into bed next to my wife. I was exhausted, but sleep was nowhere to be found. And so I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, wondering about the decisions that had led us there. There had been a knot growing in the pit of my stomach ever since we'd parked the car, and it had only tightened since we'd arrived at the farmhouse. Arthur and Ruthie were nice enough, but there was something they weren't telling us. If I were watching the night play out like a movie, I imagined that the twist would be that they were secretly plotting our demise, or that the screaming sounds I'd been hearing were those of their victims chained up in the large garage behind the house. But I didn't think so. It wasn't that I didn't think they were capable. I'd only just met them and had no idea what they were actually capable of. It was more that it just didn't seem to fit. It was the look on Arthur's face when he asked me if I'd been with Melanie the whole time we'd been stopped there. It was the undertone in his voice when he told whatever was outside that he was just telling me a story. It was the story itself. What was that exactly? Just an elderly man retelling a memory from his childhood? Or was it something else? A cry echoed outside the window, this one sounding like "Ma." It seems more believable now that it was a bird, because it certainly didn't sound human now that I'd had the chance to hear it without other sound pollution. Not exactly human, anyway. Melanie snorted beside me, the preamble to a full-on snore coming in the next few weeks, I was sure. Another scream, this one closer, but from a different direction. The birds were all talking to each other. I sighed and closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep, even if it was for just a couple of hours. The house was cold, probably from poor insulation and the single-paned windows. I pulled the sheets up and turned to my side, pulling my knees up to my chest for a little extra warmth. I was nearly asleep when I heard claws scratch the wall outside the house, and my eyes flew open. Was that the coyotes again? Did coyotes do that? I wasn't sure. I sat up and listened for more, knowing full well that in the morning I would feel silly for being as scared as I was, but also knowing that the night has a way of making monsters come out, even if they're just the ones in your head. A scream broke through the silence, this one incredibly loud and right outside the window. I looked over at Melanie, expecting her to be as awake as I was, but she only stirred. I got out of bed and crossed the room, throwing the curtains open, hoping to scare away whatever was sitting outside. I hadn't expected to see a face on the other side of the glass. I stumbled backward, tripping on my own feet and falling onto the wooden floor with a sharp thud. From where I lay, I could see nothing but moonlight coming through the crack in the curtain, and for that, I was thankful. Had the face been that of Arthur, I would have at least understood, despite how sick it would have made me feel. But the face I saw through the glass wasn't Arthur or Ruthie. I don't think it was even human. Just like the sounds of screaming I had heard through the wall, it was close to being human, but still not quite right. The eyes were too big and far apart, the mouth too wide, the nose too flat. Could it have been my reflection? The logical part of my mind liked that answer. It liked it a lot. I stood up cautiously, fearful that the face would still be there peering at me through the glass, but as I stood, I saw that that wasn't the case. I could see myself in the glass, just well enough to convince myself that that's what I had seen. Scared of my own reflection. Had Melanie been awake, there's no way I would ever live this one down. But despite the noises I had just made, she still lay soundly asleep. I closed the curtains again, taking care to ensure that not a sliver of moonlight came through them, then lay back down next to my wife. I didn't sleep much that night. I don't think I would have regardless, given the intermittent screams and cries coming from just outside my bedroom window. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see the image of the face that was looking back at me through the glass. A circus funhouse image of a human face burned into my retinas like the flash of a camera lens. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I opened my eyes to find rods of sunlight cast from the window into the bedroom. Melanie was stirring, which meant soon she would be awake and in the bathroom. I checked my phone, still no service, but it reported the time to be just before 6. I got out of bed and got dressed, determined to get out of there as soon as Melanie was ready. The image from the night before had dulled by then, and although the memory still gave me the creeps, the logical part of my brain had daylight on its side, and by the end of breakfast, I would have myself convinced that it had been my reflection in the glass. I quietly opened the door and stepped out of the bedroom. The scent of coffee wafted through the air, although I didn't hear anyone moving around the house just yet. I made my way to the kitchen, expecting to find either Arthur or Ruthie sitting down at the table enjoying a mug, or at least a full pot of coffee with a timer that had gone off. Instead, I found 2 empty mugs of coffee and a half pot sitting on the burner. I didn't have time to wonder where they had gotten off to because I heard Ruthie's voice in the yard calling to Arthur. I peeked out of the window to see Arthur's truck backing up toward the large garage. "Was it just the one?" she called to him over the sound of the truck's engine. Arthur turned off the truck, stepped out of the driver's seat, and came around to the bed where he had 2 large iron poles sticking out over the back. "No, it was 2 this time," he said. "Got a 1-mile one and a half-mile one now." He dropped the tailgate of the truck, and the 2 metal poles clattered loudly. "They're getting more clever, Ruth," Arthur said, hoisting the large street signs out of the back of the truck and carrying them to the shed. "It was only the one sign with the Pruitts, and I don't even know where they're getting these things. Probably off some stretch of the road around here. We're gonna have to do something about it sooner or—" "Don't you say such a thing," Ruthie said sharply. I know, Arthur said, putting his hands up. "I'm sorry. I just don't like cleaning up their messes is all." "We'll take it up with them," Ruthie said. "He's your—" Arthur looked up fiercely at her, and she didn't finish her sentence. "He may be yours, but he ain't mine," he growled. "Mine's out under the apple tree." The couple walked around toward the door, and I quickly slipped back to the bedroom. Melanie was sitting up. "Hey, Matt, what time is it?" "I don't know," I said. "Somewhere around 6, I think. We should get going, though." Melanie stretched. "Yeah," she said through a wide yawn. "That's probably a good idea. How'd you sleep?" "I slept great," I lied, knowing that the truth would surely cause questions that I'd rather not answer just then. "Me too," she said, scratching the back of her head. "Best night's sleep I've had since I got pregnant. Let me pee, then I'll get dressed and we can go." I agreed, trying not to sound too eager with the rising sense of unease filling my gut. She got out of bed, donned a robe that I assume Ruthie had given her the night before, and patted her way to the guest bathroom across the hall. Arthur had gotten up earlier this morning to collect the street signs we had seen the night before. That much was obvious. What wasn't so obvious was why. Who had put them there? The elderly couple returned from outside just as Mel was coming back from the bathroom. "Oh," Ruthie exclaimed. "I didn't think you 2 would be up for at least another hour or so. Let me get breakfast on." "That's all right," I said. "We really should get back on the road anyway." "I have coffee on already, so at least take a cup to go with the couple of blueberry muffins I made the night before last." I opened my mouth to politely decline, but Mel beat me to it. "I don't think I can look at a blueberry right now," she said, followed by a dry heave. The woman nodded knowingly. Just fine then. How about you? I shook my head. I'm not much of a breakfast person, I told her. All right, Ruthie said, drawing the word out like she was talking to children. But if you leave this house hungry, it's your own fault. She went into the kitchen, presumably to get her own breakfast started, and Melanie went back to the bedroom to collect her things, but Arthur lingered with me in the hallway. Your wife get morning sickness a lot? He asked after a silence that felt like an eternity, broken only by the sound of Ruthie's movements in the kitchen. She did at first, I told him. This is the first time in a while, though. The road trip is probably taking a toll, I think. Arthur nodded slowly. Yeah, probably. Then, after another long pause, you said you were with her the whole time, right? Ever since your car broke down. Yeah, I said slowly. Why? He shook his head, as if that told me all that I needed to know. All right, Mel, said Mel, opening the door behind me. I'm ready when you are. I'll get my keys, Arthur said. The ride back to the car was quiet and uneventful. Mel waited in the passenger seat, resuming her quest for a comfortable position, while I popped the hood and went to work connecting the two batteries to each other to start the car. To my relief, the car started on the second try. Thank you for everything, I told Arthur as I slammed the hood of the car down. Last night would have been much worse if it wasn't for you and your wife. I offered my hand out for him to shake, which he took with the leathery grip of a man who had spent his whole life working with his hands. There was another look in his eye then, as we stood on the shoulder of the road shaking hands, that told me there was more that he wanted to say, but something even then was holding him back. We loosened our grip, and just before I could turn away, Arthur stopped me. Hold on a minute, he said. I've got something for you from Ruthie. He went to the cab of his truck and returned with a dilapidated cardboard box. Some clothes for your little one. It ain't much, but we won't get any use out of 'em. I took the box and thanked him, doubting that we'd ever use them, but feeling that if I refused, he would insist, and I would still leave with the box. Thanks, Arthur, I said. One more thing, he said before I could turn around. His voice got quiet when he spoke, just above a whisper and far too quiet for anyone other than the two of us to hear. I looked up at him and frowned, searching his face for the joke that wasn't there, nodded uneasily, then said goodbye. Arthur stood in the middle of the dirt road, waving broadly at us from the rearview mirror as a silhouette disappeared into the dust kicked up by our tires. Sometimes the road signs lie. A few weeks ago, my wife and I went on a road trip for a family reunion in El Paso, Texas. I am now sitting in the hospital waiting room, desperately wishing we hadn't. How much longer? Melanie asked, leaning her seat back and putting her hand into the small of her back in a feeble attempt to find a more comfortable position. Google says we've got a few more hours to go, I said, glancing quickly at my phone sitting in the cup holder, then putting my eyes back to the road. Do we need to stop again? Melanie shifted in her seat a bit, removed her hand from behind her, then sat it back up to its original vertical position. At 7 months pregnant, her options for comfort were quickly dwindling, and none of them involved the front seat of a car. No, let's just go. If we stop again, I'm not going to want to get back into the car. Signal lost. My phone's robotic female voice announced. God damn it, I sighed. The phone had been doing that for the past couple of hours at increasing intervals. There had apparently been an accident or something on the main highway, which would have backed us up by at least an hour according to Google. In order to avoid that, we'd taken a detour that snaked around the accident through the desert on a 2-lane highway. That had been 3 hours ago, maybe more. It was hard to keep track of when it had happened because even before the phone had alerted us of the accident, the whole trip had been little more than a palette of browns and grays, broken up only by the regular bathroom break. As I saw it, the New Mexico desert was the skid mark on the underpants of America. And if I never had the pleasure of driving through it again, it would be too soon. The sun had set about an hour ago, not long before the signal started getting more spotty, and the highway hypnosis had really started to get to me. There was nothing but desert on either side of us, and even with the high beams on, the darkness covered us like a thick blanket. "Got any more Red Bull?" I asked. "If we're gonna go for a few more hours, I need some wings." Melanie reached into the back seat for a second, grunting with discomfort, then returned with a can of Red Bull. "Last one," she said. "This was sitting on the seat, so the sun warmed it up for you." "Great," I said, taking the can, cracking the seal, and swallowing 3 large gulps. "This will sit well with all the other junk I've been eating for the past 2 days." Without a baby on the way, Mel and I could have driven the stretch between Bozeman and El Paso in 2 days without a problem. But with her being as pregnant as she was, we had to carve out almost double the time, and she was still miserable. I let out a burp that tasted like all the atrocious snacks and truck stop food from that day mixed with the warm energy drink I was layering on top. Solemnly, I promised myself I would eat nothing but salad and water for the rest of my life. "Turn left here for the Church of Christ." "I thought the Church of Christ was back there," Mel said, reading the dilapidated sign as we passed it. "No, that was the Church of Jesus Christ," I said. Big difference, apparently. All through the drive, we'd seen a wide variety of local churches, mostly generic, but after passing one called the Church of Liberty over a backdrop of a poorly drawn Confederate flag, we had turned it into a sort of game. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the engine and the intermittent signal lost notification from my phone. I had looked at the phone earlier when the signal was stronger and saw that we just needed to go to the end of this road, turn right, and we'd find ourselves getting back onto the freeway. That was until we saw a sign that said, "Freeway entrance left 1 mile." "I thought you said it was a right at the end of the road," Melanie said, sitting up and grabbing the phone. "That's what it said," I insisted. "I checked it last time we had service, like half an hour ago. We had about 60 or so miles to go, and then it was a right." "How sure are you?" she asked, putting the phone back into the cup holder. "'Cause your phone is still saying it has no service, so it's not going to be any help." "Pretty damn," I said. Just then we passed another sign. "Freeway entrance, left, 0.5 miles. "At least, I think so." "I think we should follow the signs," Mel said. "I don't want to get lost out here, and the phone hasn't had consistent service in a while. It could have reset and changed routes or something to have us avoid the highway. Remember last time?" I did remember last time. A Vegas trip that ended up being 4 hours longer than it should have been because my phone reset and had us taking frontage roads and city streets. It would have been longer had Mel not thought to check the route on her phone. I was sure that I had seen it was taking us back to the highway, and that the next turn was a right in about 30 minutes or so, given our current speed. But with the evidence to the contrary quickly approaching me in the darkness, illuminated by my headlights, I made the single most critical mistake that I would regret for the rest of my life. I followed the street sign and turned left. Mel leaned back in her seat, embarking again on her quest for a comfortable position, and I continued to stare at the lines in the road as we passed. Time begins to lose meaning when you've been on the road in the dark for as long as we were that night. It could have been hours that we spent speeding straight down the desert road, or it could have been days. With no focal point, it was really up to the clock alone to tell us how long we'd been there, and the clock on the dashboard had inexplicably reset at some point, something it did on occasion for most of the time I'd owned the car. My faith in the phone had begun to waver even further, as I was becoming sure even that clock was running slow somehow. We'd drove for 5 or 6 miles according to the odometer, and the clock would read only a minute or two had passed. I drained the last bit of Red Bull down my throat, again promising myself nothing but clean eating after this trip was over. Moments later, I felt a dull pressure in my bowels. The last drop of liquid must have been the last straw for my bladder. Mel slept quietly next to me, having finally crashed a while back, and I made the second decision I would come to regret. Although we hadn't seen another car for miles, I flipped my hazard lights on and pulled over to the side of the road. I turned off the car and stepped out and relieved myself, relishing one of the finer points of being a man and having the ability to take a leak in the middle of the road without much fanfare. Mel stirred then and asked if we were there yet. Not yet, just a bit further, had to take a leak. She rolled her eyes and closed them again. I turned the key to start the car back up and heard a sound that sunk my heart into my stomach. Click, 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 click. "Oh, shit," I said under my breath. "Please don't do this." I turned the key again and once more heard the series of clicks telling me that my car didn't have enough power to start. Fuck, I sighed, resting my head against the steering wheel in defeat. "What's wrong?" Mel asked, opening one eye. "The battery's dead." "What?" There was a hint of panic in her voice and she sat back up, totally awake now. "Yeah, it was running off of the alternator. The battery needs just enough power to start, then the car can run off of the power generated by the alternator. All we need is a jump, and we should be able to get the rest of the way, as long as we don't turn the car off." "But who's gonna jump us?" Mel asked. "It's been a while," I admitted. "Definitely not since we made that turn back there." "Fuck," Mel spat. "Fuck, fuck, fuck." "Stay here," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Where are you going?" she asked, the panic in her voice arising. "Just up there," I said, pointing down the road. "I think I see a sign maybe 100 yards out there. It might give us an idea of which direction we need to go, or if we need to just wait until the sun comes up." She nodded. "I'll keep my flashlight on so you can see where I am. I'll just go there, then straight back. Unless I see a Denny's. Then you're on your own." She flipped me off. I kissed her cheek and stepped out into the night. The air was brisk, despite having been downright hot during the day. I shivered and hugged my arms around my torso. As I approached, I realized it wasn't the kind of sign I was hoping for. It was made of cracked wood that looked just a little better than the sign for the church we'd seen a while back. Painted in white letters, it read, "Gomper's Farm," above a crudely drawn arrow pointing down a dirt path to the right. My gaze followed the arrow, and I thought I could see a light far off in the distance. A scream broke through the darkness that turned my blood to ice. "Mel?" I called, wheeling around and bolting back the way I came. "Melanie?" I could see the shape of the car in the distance, but it was too far away from my flashlight to do much good. I sprinted down the road, screaming my wife's name in a hot panic. What? Melanie called back, alarmed. I slowed when I heard her voice and held the light up again. She was standing on the passenger side of the car with the door open. "I thought I heard you screaming," I said through heaving breaths. She looked around, confused. "No? You didn't hear that?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I was in the car until I heard you yelling, though." "I don't know," I said, shaking my head and spitting the bitter flavor of adrenaline into the dirt. "Maybe it was an animal or something," she suggested. "What did the sign say?" "There's a farmhouse or something about a mile down the road, I think. It's not exactly ideal, but if I jog it, I could make it in about 10 minutes or so." She mulled it over for a moment. Then I saw the resolve on her face, and I knew what was coming next. "I'm going with you, then." I didn't like it, but I could tell that arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere but the doghouse. And considering the scream I heard, I preferred having her close. "Fine," I agreed. "Grab your jacket, though. I'm gonna grab mine and a couple of water bottles from the back." A moment later, we were hiking down the road, our silhouettes illuminated intermittently by the orange hazard lights we'd elected to leave on. I doubted the battery would last if those lights were on too long. Mel had thought to leave a note on the windshield telling whomever found it that we'd gone to the farmhouse. Hopefully, they'd stick around long enough to help. There was a cool breeze that played with our hair as we walked. Not uncomfortable, but enough to make me zip my jacket up just a bit more. Mel held the only flashlight we had, and the beam bounced up and down in the darkness like a buoy. The car was barely visible when Mel shrieked so suddenly I nearly tripped on my own foot. "What? What?" I asked, suddenly panicked. "Look," she said, extending her finger past the head of the flashlight. "What?" "It's gone now. You didn't see it?" No, I was too busy asking myself why I'm hiking with a pregnant banshee. "There's something out there," she said, ignoring my jab. "Just past that rock. I saw a pair of golden eyes." "Probably a coyote," I said, starting to walk again. "They're cowards. If we keep walking and talking, nothing should bug us, especially if we stick to the road here." Mel nodded, then caught up to me. "How much longer do you think it'll be till we get to the farm?" "Don't know," I shrugged. 10 or 15 minutes, maybe? Just then, I saw the eyes she was talking about. Out in the distance, next to a large boulder on the side of the road, sat a pair of curious golden eyes. "Definitely a coyote," I said, pointing at it. "You can see its shape a bit. All fours, low to the ground. It looks like it might be a little bit bigger than the ones I've seen." We kept talking as we walked down the path, closer to the eyes, tired, and when they disappeared, I was a bit disappointed, but not surprised. Part of me wanted to see the coyote up close, but if we got close enough to see it, that probably meant we were close to a den. We talked about what we'd do when we finally got home and how soon we'd find ourselves laughing about the whole ordeal. The walk was long and difficult for Mel, but eventually we saw the farmhouse's silhouette against the horizon. It wasn't huge, but it looked livable, and more importantly, there was light. "Thank God," Mel muttered, squeezing my arm. "At least someone's awake." We quickened our pace, gravel crunching beneath our feet, until the dirt road opened up to the yard of the property. The house looked old, but cared for. Paint peeled in spots, but the porch light glowed warmly. A rocking chair creaked slightly in the breeze. We climbed the steps and I knocked on the door. It was late, so I half expected no one to answer. But a few moments later, the door creaked open and an older man appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, with thinning gray hair. "Well now," he said, "what brings y'all out here this late?" "Sorry to bother you," I said quickly. "Our car died out on the road. My wife's 7 months pregnant. We just need some help getting it jumped." The man's eyes softened.
Then he nodded. "Name's Arthur. Y'all better come inside first. Rolls aren't safe at night." From behind him, a woman's voice chimed. "Who is it?" "Travelers," Arthur called back. The woman appeared, petite, with sharp eyes, maybe a little younger than Arthur.
"I'm Ruthie," she said, eyeing us up and down. "You poor things. Come inside." Mel glanced at me, then back at Ruthie, then stepped into the house. I followed. The interior was odd. Old wallpaper, mismatched furniture, the faint smell of dust and something herbal. But it was warm, and after hours on the cold road, that felt like heaven. Arthur shut the door firmly behind us, sliding the lock into place. Ruthie ushered Mel toward a couch, fussing over her like an anxious aunt. 7 months, my lord. You shouldn't be out here walking. Sit. Arthur gestured at me. "You want some tea? Help take the chill off?" I hesitated, but Mel gave me a look, the kind that said, "Don't be rude." "Sure," I said. Arthur disappeared into the kitchen, and soon the faint whistle of a kettle filled the silence. Ruthie sat across from us, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes never leaving Mel. "Boy or girl?" she asked. "Boy," Mel said softly. Ruthie smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Strong name picked out yet?" "We've got a few," I said carefully. Just then, Arthur returned with 2 mugs of steaming tea. He handed one to me and one to Mel. "Drink up. Long road ahead." The tea smelled strong, earthy, not like the bagged stuff I was used to. I took a small sip, trying not to grimace. Mel lifted hers too, but didn't drink right away. Arthur sat heavily in his chair, staring at us with a strange smile. "Not many folk come down our road. Signs don't usually send them this way." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. I forced a smile. "Yeah, weird detour. Phone kept losing signal." Arthur chuckled. "Phones don't work right out here. They get confused." Ruthie tilted her head. "Best to listen to the signs. That's what they're there for." The room felt smaller somehow, the air thicker. I set the mug down on the table, only half drunk. Mel shifted uncomfortably beside me, one hand on her belly. Arthur leaned forward. "So, your car. We'll take a look in the morning. Roads at night ain't safe." I frowned. "But it's just a battery. I can walk back with you." Ruthie cut me off sharply. "Mornin'." The finality in her voice silenced me. Arthur leaned back again, as if nothing had happened, sipping his tea slowly. We sat in uneasy quiet. The only sound the faint creak of the rocking chair outside. Mel whispered to me, almost too softly to hear, "I don't like this." I squeezed her hand under the blanket Ruthie had draped over her. "It's fine," I whispered back. "We'll be okay." Arthur's eyes lingered on me, like he'd heard every word. I took another gulp of tea, trying to get the mug down at least halfway, and agreed. Sometimes the road signs lie. Part 3. Final update. I never thought I'd return to Gomper's farm, let alone so quickly, but circumstances change, and with them, expectations. It took me nearly a whole day to find the road the signs had led us down, and by then it was dusk, and I returned back to my hotel so as not to be out after dark. Melanie stayed home this time. Her condition had gotten significantly worse since our road trip, and she had been prescribed bed rest by the OBGYN, among other things, until she was ready to deliver. Her mother hadn't been happy with me flying out to New Mexico, even with the lie we told her about it being a work trip. But her mother's chagrin was a small price to pay for what I was hoping to get out of a reunion with Arthur and Ruthie.
I drove up the dirt road, following the only street sign now for Gumper's farm, hoping to find an answer to something that had happened to us not long after returning home. I parked my car next to Arthur's pickup truck and stepped out. I waited for a moment, wondering if I would hear the sound of the birds carrying human-like screams along the air. To my relief, I heard nothing at all. I walked around to the front of the house, prepared to knock as I had mere weeks before, but found that I didn't need to. The door to the farmhouse was open. Dirt coated the entrance floor, suggesting that it had been open for a while. Cautiously, remembering the face I had seen in the window, but feeling the bravery given to me by the daylight, I called out into the house. "Hello?" I called. "Arthur? Ruthie?" I stepped into the house, noting first that the shotgun Arthur had answered the door with was no longer propped against the wall in the corner by the door. "Hello?" I called again. "Is anyone there?" It was a young boy's room, a time capsule from decades ago. The boy who had once dwelt here must have been 6 or so, judging by the toys, books, and decorations that filled the space. Above the bed in large block letters was the name Jonathan. The next room was a bathroom, adorned with yellow daisies over most of the surfaces. I opened the door to the final room and was struck by 2 things simultaneously. First was the body of Ruthie Gumper laying in the bed. She wore a nightgown and looked as if she had gone peacefully in her sleep. Second was the putrid odor that had somehow not completely filled the house, possibly because the door had been left open. It was clear that she had been dead for at least a few days, perhaps not long after Mel and I had left. But there was still no sign of Arthur. I went downstairs and out the front door, glad to be rid of the smell that followed me after I opened the door. I walked around the side of the house, calling Arthur's name and getting nothing in return. I checked inside the large shed and found the road signs that Mel and I had seen driving down the road that night, along with the third that said freeway entrance left 1 mile, just like the first sign we had seen. I turned the flashlight in my phone on and held it up to get a better look at the shed. There was some old farm equipment scattered around the area, but what caught my attention was toward the back. I took a few more steps to get a better look and found a corner of the space had been decorated like a bedroom. There was an old bed with a rusty frame and a torn mattress set up in the corner, along with a collection of what appeared to be chew toys sprinkled around. Above the bed, in block letters similar to the boy's bedroom I had seen in the house, was the name Christopher. I took a few more curious steps forward to get a better look at the makeshift living space, then felt something at my feet. I stooped to pick up the item buried in the dirt and found part of a chain. As I picked it up, the chain emerged from its resting place in the ground, and as I pulled it up, I found that it was connected to a large metal pole posted near the bed. I followed the chain on the other side and found at the end part of a broken shackle. I dropped the chain, letting it tinkle to the ground, and left as quickly as I could. If Arthur was here, I knew that this was the last place he would want me to be. I examined the rest of the farmyard, wondering where, if at all, I would find Arthur, and my eyes landed on a shape beneath a tree in the distance. I could hear Arthur's words from the weeks before, "Mine's under the apple tree," and wondered if this was the tree he had spoken of. As I drew closer, the shape beneath the tree became clearer, and I recognized it as the man I sought. "Arthur," I called, beginning to jog now. "Arthur, I really need to—" I stopped. It was Arthur, but he wouldn't be answering any of my questions. The top of his skull was missing, and his body was slumped against the trunk of the tree, hunched over the barrel of the shotgun that still rested in his mouth.
His body was covered in bite marks and scratches that looked like perhaps he had given himself the least painful death presented to him. Beside Arthur's body stood a wooden cross with the name Jonathan carved into the horizontal piece. He had said his was under the apple tree. He had meant his son. Which begged the question I had come with that now seemed wouldn't be answered. What happened to the other boy?
A piece of paper stuck out between Arthur's fingertips. I stooped down and grabbed it, hoping perhaps a suicide note would give me at least part of the answer I had come for. It wasn't a note, however, but a photograph, one that had to be 25 years old or so. A younger-looking Arthur smiled back at me, holding a 5-year-old at his hip who wore a wide grin and a pair of overalls just like his father. Next to them stood a younger Ruthie who stood next to another child who was far larger than the first and whose face had been scratched out. My stomach twisted in knots as I looked down at the second boy. The shirt he wore was one that had been given to us in the box of old clothes. But despite the clothes, it was clear to see that there was still something off about him. His legs and arms weren't quite right. His fingers too long, his torso too thin. It was the body that belonged to the face I had seen when we had spent the night, and I had opened the curtain. A creature meant to seem human, but had just missed the mark.
I put the photograph back into Arthur's dead hand and walked back toward my car. Melanie hadn't been right ever since we left that night. She had gotten sicker and sicker by the day. Her OBGYN had insisted that we come in to make sure everything was all right, and that was when we discovered it. Melanie was pregnant with twins. The doctor told us that it was possible, however rare, to miss a child on the ultrasound, but I knew that wasn't what it was. The pieces all started to fall together for me over the next few days, which led me to take a flight back out to New Mexico in the hopes that Arthur or Ruthie could help us. When we had left that day, Arthur had told me something that I hadn't taken very seriously then. He said, if she has two, take the little one and run. Those words echoed in my head when we went through the box of clothes Ruthie had given us. We saw that the baby clothes came mostly in pairs, which made sense because we knew that the couple had twin boys. But when we noticed that there was always a far larger outfit than the other, I began to wonder why Arthur had told me to take the little one and run. What had happened to his little one? Furthermore, why had he been so concerned about my leaving Melanie alone that night? He had asked me at least twice to make sure, as if it were vitally important, and I had shrugged it off, not realizing then that I had left her alone that night, just once, when I jogged out to get a better view of the street sign. Just before I heard her scream. She doesn't remember it, but I believe that moment is when that thing, Christopher, got to her. Arthur had warned me about the birds that lay their eggs in another bird's nest. He had even gone as far as to call the things making the terrible noises birds, and it hadn't clicked. He had been trying to warn us about Christopher and however many others like him there were living there at the farm, about the dozen or so pairs of eyes that had followed us up the trail to the house. Those things didn't like that and stopped him. They had cried out in the dark outside the window as they listened to him tell me the story about the brood parasite birds and the birds who mimic the sounds of children crying. They didn't like it because by then they had laid their egg, leaving nothing but a faint white scar encircling her navel that was nearly completely gone now. And they didn't want us to know. I wondered if Arthur had killed Christopher before taking his own life. The wounds on his body told the story of a man who had fought hard against a wild animal, and I could only imagine it had been the creature who had been born from his wife's womb alongside his son.
He had told me that the blackbird had ripped the other bird to pieces when he was a boy, and I couldn't help but think that the same thing had happened to his son at the hand of the other. If that were true, the only thing that could stand between Arthur and redemption for his son was Ruthie, and with her gone, that was all he had left to do. I could see him discovering her death and setting out to avenge the death of his only son after all these years, only to find that the fight was one he could no longer win. He had taken his gun outside and had searched for the beast, eventually finding him and perhaps killing him before crawling his way up to where his son lay and turning the gun on himself lest the wounds take his life instead. Or perhaps not. There was no way to be sure. Not really. I got back to my car and climbed into the driver's seat. My hand shook as I turned the key and started back down the road. My phone found service for just a moment, and I looked down and saw that I had 3 missed calls. 2 from Mel and 1 from her mother. There was a text message as well that read, "It's happening!" I was about to be a father. I stepped on the gas pedal and sped back down toward the main road, stopping only for a moment to make the turn at the now-defunct sign that read Gomper's Farm. As I made the turn and the sound of the engine was just low enough, I thought I could hear a cry carried in the air. The sound was almost human. Ma!
Story 1. I was born with the ability to see thoughts. There's something living in my coworker's mind. I've never told this to anyone, not even my family, but I feel it necessary to write this after what I saw a few days ago. People like to think that their thoughts are private, never to be seen by anyone but themselves. But to me, minds are like open windows, easy to be peered into and invaded. It's sort of like tuning a radio. I can choose whose thoughts I want to listen in on and when to reach in. I was just sort of born with this ability. I'm not really sure why. I've learned to glide through life without drawing that much attention. Smile when people expect it, nod when they need reassurance. It's easy when you already know what they expect to hear. But of course, not all gifts come without downsides. Some thoughts best go unseen. I've heard things I truly wish I hadn't. Not just painful truths or depressing regrets. No, I've seen things far darker than that. The most sick and twisted of sexual fantasies, the burning sadistic desire to kill and inflict suffering, festering, writhing hatred for all of humanity. You'd be surprised what some people hide behind a calm exterior. What I'm trying to say is that I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I knew what the darkest, most sinister things on this planet were. That all changed a few days ago. I've worked in retail for a couple months as of writing this. The closing shift at a cheap grocery store. The kind with bright lights, loud pop music, and dried-up plants by the entrance. It was about as uninteresting as it sounds. That was until he showed up. He just appeared on the schedule one day as Jack. Corporate said he was a transfer. The first shift I had with him was 3 days ago, stocking the back shelves together. He didn't talk much, didn't ask questions, didn't seem confused by anything. He just knew where everything went. That was the first red flag. The second was the silence. No matter how meditative someone is, nobody can truly stop thinking. The human mind simply doesn't work that way. Even when you're sleeping, your brain is still creating thoughts. Minds can be quiet, sure, but they can never be silent. Jack's was dead silent. His mind was like a black hole, almost suffocatingly quiet. No thoughts, no feelings, not the slightest peep. Just a cold, empty pit where a person should have been. I can't possibly describe to you how shocking it felt reading his thoughts for the first time, only to be met with nothing. It was just so unnatural, so impossible. It felt like my entire perception of the universe was being thrown away. I focused harder, straining myself to dig deeper into his mind, desperate to find something, anything. And I did find something, at least a trace of something. I could just barely pick up on it underneath all the silence. It was like a faint, rancid odor from something far away, festering in the distance. It felt sinister. It felt vile. It felt disgusting. It felt like it was staring back at me, like I was looking down at a black, murky ocean with a massive, inhuman face, just barely visible a few dozen meters below the surface, gleefully smiling up at me. And then, for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of something. Not just a trace, not just a feeling. I saw it. Only a glimpse, and a blurred one at that. But for a few seconds, I saw it. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't like anything else I've seen in someone's mind. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but I'll do my best. From what I could make out, a massive labyrinth larger than a planet, constructed from rancid, rotting, moldy red meat, all of it swarming with trillions of maggots, flies, and other hellish insects, some of them mutated to freakish proportions. There were a few thousand people in the labyrinth, each horribly maimed in their own gruesome way. They were ravenously eating away at the rotting meat, their stomachs bloating to ridiculous sizes, only to eventually shit it all out. That was their eternity. I don't think they were allowed to die. I don't think the labyrinth would let them. And then I could no longer see it. The glimpse was over. It was less than 5 seconds, but it felt like hours. I had seen so much, and yet somehow I could tell that I only scratched the surface. That labyrinth was only the tip of the iceberg, and if I kept digging deeper, I would find things far, far, far worse. I remember standing there for several minutes, completely paralyzed, sweat coating me from head to toe. I don't think I'd ever been more scared in my life. I felt like my mind was unraveling. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to, something that was never meant to be seen. And the worst part is, it saw me back. It knew I was looking at it. I'm 100% sure about it. I don't know how I know, but I do. Maybe it's a sixth sense, or maybe it wanted me to know. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is that it saw me. Jack didn't pay any attention to me. He was still silently stalking the shelves, acting like I wasn't even there, a blank expression on his face. He wasn't human. That wasn't even a debate. No, it was just wearing a lifeless human body, like a cheap disguise.
I ran out of the building as fast as I could, making sure I got as far away as possible before calling my boss. I told him I had a family emergency, that I probably wouldn't be able to come to work for a few days. He was a reasonable guy, so he understood. It's been 3 days since then, and I can't stop thinking about it. What I saw, that labyrinth, the people inside it. The details are still burned into my mind, and I don't think I'll ever be able to rid myself of them. My hands won't stop shaking, and I can feel my sanity slowly slipping away. But what scares me the most is that what I saw wasn't the worst of it. The labyrinth was just the thing on the surface, the thing I saw first. I could tell there was more, a lot more. The rabbit hole went far, far deeper down, and now I can't shake the horrible feeling of being watched. I don't know what to do. I don't think there's much I can do. I caught a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to see, and now I'm going to be punished. There are fates worse than death in this world. I can only pray I am not to meet with one. Story 2. My mom vanished in the woods 8 years ago. I just got a letter from her. I woke up hungover that day in my college dorm. I had drunk way too much at a bar the night before, celebrating until sunrise what would be my 20th birthday. When I checked my mailbox around noon, there was a white envelope with handwriting on it and no sender. Happy birthday, Carrot. I'm still waiting for you at the same place. Come here tomorrow at dawn and look for my blue coat. Signed, Mom. Reading those words sent chills all over my body. Since my mom vanished 8 years earlier, my family had gotten dozens of fake letters and false leads. But that word, carrot, told me this one was different. It was our inside joke. She started calling me that after I once scarfed down a whole plate of carrots just so she'd let me go play at the arcade. Nobody else could have known.
My mom disappeared on a trail near town. We used to hike it almost every Sunday as a family. It was about 2 miles, ending at a pond where locals like to fish. That day, my dad was sick, so it was just me and her. We laughed and walked until I had to pee. She told me to go ahead and stayed behind, maybe 20 feet away. Nothing seemed unusual while I was peeing in that tree, except for the sound of a branch snapping, which I brushed off as nothing. I finished, turned around to call her, and she was gone. I waited half an hour thinking maybe she'd stepped off the trail too. Then I ran to the pond. Then I sprinted back to the parking lot, and the car was still there, locked. She had vanished into thin air. One of the local fishermen called my dad and the cops, and soon they combed every inch of that forest. Everyone was looking for her blue jacket, something that would stand out against the trees, but they never found a trace. Pretty soon, the whole state knew about it. The kid that lost his mom. It usually went the other way around. Then came the TV reports, the YouTube channels, the podcasts. Theories stacked up. First, people said she left due to an affair with a coworker, a known womanizer that had suspiciously moved out of state. Second, that she was killed by the so-called pickaxe maniac, a serial killer who'd murdered 3 women in the region a few years earlier and usually leaves the murder weapon at the spot. Third, the cops considered my dad might have done it for the life insurance money. No proof ever surfaced, and her case faded into silence. Right after I got the letter, I called my dad, telling him about the carrot thing. His reaction was hard to read. We hadn't spoken in months after some stupid fights, but he insisted the letter was a prank. He practically begged me not to go, said I should call the police immediately. His desperation ticked me off, so I hung up on him, same as last time we argued. I decided I'd go back to that trail. Even if it was a joke, I needed to know if there was any hope left of seeing my mother. I drove all night and got there at dawn, parking near a pickup with some fishing equipment in it, the only other vehicle there. The trail was burned into my memory from all those childhood walks, even if I hadn't set foot on it since the day she disappeared. I walked for a few minutes and stopped at the same spot where I'd stepped off years ago to pee. Standing there again felt unreal, and not in a good way. I reached the same tree I had peed on and froze, staring at the trunk like it owned me something. Then I heard a crack behind me, like a branch snapping, just like I remembered from that day. I spun around and saw nothing unusual, just the wind pushing leaves. Then I noticed it, a flash of blue in the distance. I followed it excitedly to find a tree with a tight blue coat wrapped around the trunk. I touched it and knew it was the same one she wore that day. Tears fell off my eyes almost automatically. Tucked under it was another envelope. I pulled it out and it had the same handwriting. "Glad you came, Carrot. I'm right beneath you." I looked down and the ground nearby looked freshly disturbed, like it had been dug up not long ago. My hand shook as I started digging, fast, frantic. Whatever truth was buried there, I needed it, or I thought I needed it. Soon I hit something solid, I clawed at the dirt until I lifted out a small wooden box, maybe 10 inches wide. It was sealed before I tore it open. Inside were only two objects. One of them was a human skull with a massive fracture on top. The other one was an old pickaxe where a dark red stain had long dried. Terror ran through every vein in my body when I saw it, and then I heard it again, the branch snapping behind me. I whipped around, panic in my throat. Now I could hear the steps coming my way. Whoever had killed her was here to finish the job with me. More snapping. Closer this time. My eyes darted between trees, desperate to catch movement. Then I saw it, a figure in black, wearing a hat. And behind him, three more shapes. Police officers. Turned out my dad had called half the town's police department, begging them to stop me. That's what saved my life. They told me the pickup I'd seen earlier probably belonged to the pickaxe maniac. When they searched it, they found hair, scraps of skin, even a severed finger. Inside were dozens of letters, all written the same way as the ones I had gotten. For some twisted reason, he seemed obsessed with me, like he wanted to finish what he'd started with my mom years later. He wasn't caught that day. He must have bolted into the woods on foot the second he spotted the cops. The only good thing that came of it was this. Just a few yards away, they found another box with my mom's remains. We could finally give her a real burial. But I can't shake the feeling that nothing's really over. I still don't know what that monster wanted with me. I still don't know how he knew about the nickname Carrot. Story 3. For nearly a decade, the doctor has been keeping my tumors. It was every parent's worst nightmare, but only for a week. When I inspected my tumor, the first of hundreds, I couldn't quite comprehend what I was looking at, rotating my forearm around in the shower with a passing curiosity. I wasn't scared, just perplexed. The growth had qualities I understood, qualities borrowed from things I was familiar with, but I hadn't ever seen them combined and configured in such a peculiar way. It was dome-shaped, like a mosquito bite, but much larger, the size of an Oreo rather than an M&M. It was the color of a day-old bruise, a wild berry, sort of reddish blue, but the tone was brighter, more visceral, a ferocious violet hue that looked disturbingly alive. And perhaps most recognizably of all, there was something jutting out the top, a glistening white pebble planted at the apex like a flag. It was a tooth. I stepped out and toweled myself off, drying the growth last, dabbing the underside of my wrist with exceptional care, concerned my new geography might pop if I pushed too hard. I molded my thumb and first finger into a delicate pincer and attempted to yank the tooth free, but the stubborn little thing refused to budge. Frustrated, I grinned into the mirror, hooking the corner of my mouth with a finger and pulling, revealing gums unevenly lined with a mixture of baby and adult teeth. For the life of me, I couldn't identify the missing tooth, the one that had fallen from my mouth while I slept with such incredible velocity that it became thoroughly lodged in my flesh when it landed. At 9 years old, it was the only explanation that made any sense. That's it, I figured. It fell from my mouth and now it's stuck. The tooth was Excalibur. My body was the stone. The notion that it may have grown from the surrounding skin didn't even cross my mind. It was too outlandish. I was losing my baby teeth and there was a tooth embedded in my arm. Simplicity dictated it came from my mouth. I showed it to my mom over breakfast that morning. Her expression was, unfortunately, anything but simple. A weak smile with shaky lips and glassy eyes. Pupils dilating, spreading like an oil spill. Same expression she wore the morning after Grandma died, the second before she told me. Guess it might not be that simple, I thought.
The following few days felt like falling without ever hitting the ground, an anxious tumble from one place to the next. My parents ushered me around with a terrible urgency, but they refused to explain their concerns outright. It was all so rapid and overwhelming, so to avoid my own simmering panic, I dissociated, my psyche barricaded behind a protective dormancy. As a result, my memories of that time are a bit fragmented.
I remember the mint green walls of my pediatrician's office, how close the color was to toothpaste, which made me wonder if I should brush the tooth sprouting from my wrist. Would it be better to do it before or after my regular teeth? Because it was outside my mouth, did I need to brush it more than twice a day or less? I wondered, but never had the nerve to ask. I remember the way my mom would whisper the word oncologist whenever she said it. The same way she'd whisper about possibly taking our Doberman for a walk. The same way Emma Watson would whisper the name Voldemort in the movies. Like something bad would happen if the oncologist heard her talking about them. And I sure as shit remember the visible relief that washed over her when the oncologist called with the biopsy results. She practically collapsed onto the kitchen floor, a marionette whose strings were being systematically cut top to bottom.
In comparison, Dad stayed rigid, his sun-bleached arms crossed, his wrinkled brow furrowed. Even after Mom put a hand up to the receiver, swung her head over, and relayed that magic word. Benign. I'd never heard the word before, but I liked it. I liked how it sounded, rolling it around in my head like a butterscotch candy, savoring new bits of flavor with every repetition. Even more than its saccharine linguistics, though, I liked the effect it had on my mom. In the wake of my growth, she'd looked so uncomfortable, twisted into knots, every muscle tightly tangled within some length of invisible barbed wire. That word, benign, was an incantation, better than abracadabra. One utterance, and she was cured, completely untangled, freed from her painful restraints.
My dad had his own incantation, though, a two-word phrase that seemed to re-inject the discomfort into Mom, drip by poisonous drip. I could almost see the barbed wire slithering across the floor, sharp metal clinking against tile, coiling up her frame before I could figure out how to stop it. Second opinion, he chanted. I don't remember him actually chanting, to be clear, but he was so goddamned insistent he might as well have. I don't care what that quack says. This is our son we're talking about. He said there's a 97% chance it won't come back after it's removed. How the hell can you be 97% sure of anything? It's either going to come back or it won't. There's only 0% and 100%. We need a second opinion. I cowered, slinking into the kitchen chair, compressing myself to the smallest size I could manage, minimizing the space I took up in our overstuffed mobile home. We can barely afford the medical expenses as is, my mom declared. Please, just spit it out, John. What exactly did you have in mind? Dad smirked. Glad you asked. Oh, it's definitely going to come back after it's excised. 100%. No doubt in my mind, Hawthorne remarked. I struggled to keep my wrist held out as the sweaty man in the three-piece suit and bolo tie examined it. As soon as he pushed back, the rolling stool's wheels screeching under his weight, I retracted the extremity like a switchblade. Everything about Dad's second opinion fell off. The doctor, Hawthorne, wanted to be addressed by his first name. The office was just a room inside Hawthorne's mansion. No posters of the human body in cross-section, no itchy gowns or oversized exam tables, nothing familiar. I was sitting in a rickety wooden chair wearing my street clothes, surrounded by walls covered in a veritable cornucopia of witchy knickknacks. Butterflies pinned inside blocks of clear amber, brightly colored plants hanging in oddly shaped pots, shimmering crystals and runic symbols painted over tarot cards, staples to the plaster, and on and on. Worst of all, Hawthorne insisted on wearing those dusty, sterile medical gloves. Initially, I was relieved to see them because it was something I recognized from other doctors. A touch of familiarity and a little physical separation between me and this strange man. But why the hell would he even bother to wear gloves with those long, sharp, jaundiced, ringworm-infested fingernails? By the time he was done with his poking and prodding, most of them had punctured through the material. The feeling of his nails scraping against my skin made me gag. The other physician your family saw wasn't completely off the mark, he went on to say, peeling the eviscerated gloves off his sweat-caked hands before shoving them in his suit pocket. Certainly a teratoma, a germ cell tumor that can grow into all sorts of things. Teeth, hair, fat, bone. I'll stop the list there. Don't want any nightmares induced on my account.
Hawthorne winked at me. I genuinely believe he was trying to be personable, maybe playful, but the expression had the opposite effect. I squirmed in my seat as if Hawthorne's attention had left a physical layer of grease or ash coating my skin and I needed to shake the residue off. His eyes were just so beady. Two tiny black dots that marred the otherwise homogeneous surface of his flat, pallid face, seemingly miles away from one another. Doesn't that mean it's malignant? My mom asked, adopting a familiar hushed tone for the last word. He shook his head, blotting beads of sweat off his spacious forehead with a yolk-colored handkerchief. No, ma'am. I would say it's recurrent, not malignant. Recurrent means just that. I expect it will recur. Malignant, on the other hand, means it would recur and... Hawthorne abruptly clamped his lips shut. He was speaking a little too candidly. Still, I knew the word he meant to say. I wasn't a baby. Excuse the awkward transparency, folks. I haven't treated a child in some time. Used to, sure, but pediatrics has been a little too painful since, well, that's neither here nor there. Allow me to skip ahead to the bottom line. Despite what the other doc said, the teratoma will reemerge after a time, and it should be removed. Not because it's malignant, but more because I imagine letting it grow too large would be distressing. For your boy's sake, I'm glad your husband got my card and gave me a call. I've been informed that money is tight. Don't fixate too much on the financing. I didn't get into medicine to bankrupt anyone. We'll do an income-based payment plan. Save any questions you have for my lovely assistant, Daphne. God knows I couldn't answer them. We followed Hawthorne through his vacant mansion and out to the rear patio. There was an older woman facing away from us at a small, circular, cast-iron table, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of black tea with a miniature spoon. In its prime, I imagined their backyard was truly a sight to behold. Its current state, however, was one of utter disrepair. Flower beds that had been reduced to fetid piles of dead stems and fungus. A cherubic sculpture missing an arm, faceless from erosion, above a waterless fountain, its basin dappled with an array of pennies, a cryptic constellation composed of long-abandoned wishes. A small bicycle being slowly subsumed by overgrowth, a dilapidated treehouse in the distance. The doctor waved us forward. Mom and I sat opposite the woman. At first, she seemed angry that we had climbed into the two empty seats without asking, face contorted into a scowl. Something changed when she saw me, however. Her anger melted away into another emotion. It was like joy, but hungrier. She wore a smile that revealed a mouthful of lipstick-stained teeth. As if to juxtapose a husband, the woman's eyes appeared too big for her face. Craterous sockets filled with balls of dry white jelly that left little space for anything else. And those eyes never left me. Not for a moment. Not even when she was specifically addressing my mom. Daphne, could you explain the payment plan to these kind folks? Hawthorne remarked as he turned to walk back inside, snapping the screen door shut. Through the transparent glass,
His eyes lingered on me as well, but his expression was different than his wife's, wistful but muted. In a choice that would only feel logical to a kid, I pretended to sleep, closed my eyes, curled up, and became still. Released a few over-enunciated snores to really sell it too. Hoped that'd make them finally stop watching me. Eventually, I felt my mom pick me up and carry me to the car. "That was your second opinion?" she hissed at Dad as we arrived home. Feeling the electricity of an argument brewing in the air, I jogged to the back of our mobile home, entered my room, and shut the door. I crawled under the covers and began flicking at the aberrant tooth. I hated it. I hated it, and I wanted it to leave me alone. Later that week, we returned to the first doctor, the normal one, the oncologist. Under sedation's dreamy embrace, my tumor was removed. 3 weeks later, I woke up to discover another, equally sized lump had taken its place. In the end, Hawthorne was right. That one didn't have a tooth. Overall, it was smoother, more circumscribed. There were some short hairs at the outer edge, though, fine, wispy, and chestnut-colored. If I had to guess, I'd say they were eyelashes, but I really tried not to think about it. All things considered, the last 10 years have been relatively uneventful. I quickly adapted to the new normal. After a year, my recurrent teratoma barely even fazed me anymore. The human brain truly is a bizarre machine. Sometimes it would take a few weeks, other times it would only take a few days. Inevitably, though, the growth would be back. My mom would call Daphne's cell and schedule an appointment for it to be excised. She'd always answer on the first ring. I imagined her sitting on the patio, swirling her tepid tea as she stared into the ruins of that backyard, phone in her other hand, gripped so tightly that her knuckles were turning white, just waiting for us to call. Despite being cut into over and over again, my wrist never developed a scar. Hawthorne attributed the miraculous healing to the powder he used to anesthetize the area before putting scalpel to skin. A bright orange dust that smelled like coriander, distinctly floral with a hint of citrus. I didn't like to watch, so I'd look up and survey the aforementioned knickknacks that covered the walls, keeping my eyes busy. Say what you want about Hawthorne, but the man was efficient. In 5 minutes, the tumor would be gone, the wound cleaned and bandaged, and I wouldn't have felt a thing. Afterwards, he delicately dropped the orphan growth into a specimen jar, handed off to a waiting Daphne, and she'd whisk it away. I always wanted to ask how they disposed of them. Never did. After each operation, he'd deliver a warning, same one every time. If it ever changes color, from purple to black, you need to come in. Don't call ahead. Just get in your car and come over, day or night. No pit stops, no hesitation. Fair enough. My teenage years flew by. Shortly after my diagnosis, Dad got a promotion. We moved from the trailer park to a much more comfortable single-story house across town. Before long, he received another promotion, and a third, and a fourth. Our financial worries disappeared. Other than the recurrent tumor, my only other health concern was some mild blurry vision. Started my freshman year of high school. I'd have to strain my eyes at the board if I sat in the last row. It wasn't that my vision was out of focus, per se. Rather, the world looked foggy because of a faint image layered over my vision. Multiple eye exams didn't get to the bottom of the issue. Everything appeared to be in working order. The ophthalmologist suggested it might be due to floaters, visual specks that can develop as you age because of loose clumps of collagen, which seemed to describe what I was experiencing. Lines and cracks and cobwebs superimposed over what was in front of me, unchanging and motionless. Once again, I adapted. Sat at the front of the class as opposed to the back. No big deal.
I'm 19 now, attending a nearby community college and living at home. I wanted to apply to Columbia, but Dad insisted otherwise. It's too far from Hawthorne. I wasn't thrilled. Didn't exactly see myself getting laid on my childhood mattress. That said, he was fronting the cost of my bachelor's degree in full. No loans required, no expectation of being paid back. I hardly had room to bellyache.
Honestly, things have been going well. Remarkably, transcendently well. Quiet wellness is a goddamned curse, however. A harbinger portending changes to come. Lulls you into a false of security, only to rip the rug out from under your feet with sadistic glee. Yesterday, around midnight, I woke up to use the bathroom. I flicked on the light. Unsurprisingly, there was a tumor on the underside of my wrist. I was overdue. No tooth, no eyelashes. But it was black. Black as death. Black as Mom's pupils the first time she saw it. I panicked. Didn't even bother to wake up my parents. I had my driver's license, after all. I bolted out the door, jumped in the car, and sped over to Hawthorne's mansion, following his instructions to a T. Within seconds of the front door opening, I knew I'd made a mistake. Hawthorne wrapped a meaty paw around my shoulder and pulled me inside. Even in the low light of the foyer, I could tell there was panic in his features, too. Then he said the words that have been relentlessly spinning around my skull since. Another incantation. I felt the imperceptible barbed wire curling up my legs as we ascended the staircase, the air getting colder and colder and colder. Cold enough that I could see the heat of his breath as he spoke once we'd reached the top. "I've been meaning to show you my son's old room." I flailed and thrashed, tried to squeeze out of his grasp, but I simply didn't have the strength. Out of the darkness, two familiar craters of white jelly materialized. Daphne unclenched her palm in front of my face and blew. Particles of sweet-smelling dust found their way into my lungs. The abyss closed in. My vision dimmed to match the black of my tumor, and I was gone. Murmurs pressed through the heavy sedation. At first, their words were incomprehensible, their syllables waterlogged, degrading and congealing together until all meaning was lost. Mid-sentence, the speech sharpened. "Not my intent, Hawthorne. You're a kind, patient spirit. You wanted the boy to be safe. You wanted to minimize discomfort. It was moral, noble even." Other sounds became appreciable. The clinking of glass, urgent footfalls against hollow wood flooring, the soft snaps of some sort of keyboard in use. "I'd thank you not to condescend, Daphne." Darkness retreated, my vision focused. An icy draft swept up my body. Excluding my boxers, I was naked. "I'm not condescending. I'm just pointing out that we knew this was a risk ahead of time, and you still put this boy's well-being above David's. If we pulled the meat slow, there was a chance it would sour. We knew that. Now look where we are." I was in a bedroom, tied to a chair with what looked like makeshift restraints, Ethernet cables drawn chaotically around my torso, rough twine around my ankles and wrists. A single hazy light bulb illuminated my surroundings. My eyes swam over peeling posters of old bands, Little League trophies, and framed photos. Daphne and Hawthorne were in some of the photos, along with a young boy that I didn't recognize. He looked eerily like myself, just aged back a decade. Not identical, but the resemblance was uncanny. At a nearby desk, my captors were hard at work. Daphne was busy grinding seeds with a mortar and pestle. Hawthorne was scribbling on a notepad, muttering to himself, intermittently tapping his dirt-caked nails against the keys of a calculator. There was an empty beaker at the center of the desk, flanked on all sides by an apothecary assortment of ingredients.
petals in slim vials, pickled meats, jars of living insects, steaming liquids in teacups. Across the room there was a bed, bulging with the silhouette concealed under a navy blue comforter. The body wasn't moving, not in a way that was recognizably human at least. The surface bubbled with something akin to carbonation. Freezer-like machines quietly growled below the bed frame. As a scream began to take form in my throat, my gaze landed on the ceiling, specifically the portion directly above the bed. To my horror, I knew the pattern. I'd been seeing it for years. Lines and cracks and cobwebs. I discharged an unearthly howl. They barely seemed to register the noise. "Daphne, do you mind going to the garden? We need to mix more powder for him." She reached up and slapped the back of his head. "There's no time," she bellowed. He paused for a moment, then returned to his notepad. I wailed. God, I wailed. But I knew as well as they did that there was no one within earshot of the mansion to hear me. When it felt like my vocal cords were beginning to tear, I calmed. Maybe a minute later, Hawthorne threw his pencil down like an A student done with their pop quiz. 6.5. 6.5 should provide enough expansion to harvest the remaining 20 grams we need for David's renewal before it sours completely. Probably won't be lethal either, he proclaimed. Without saying a word, Daphne filled the empty beaker with saline. Hawthorne twisted the lid off a jar of what looked like translucent, crimson-colored marbles with tiny silver crosses fixed at their core. He picked up a nearby handheld tuning rod and flicked it. 2 notes resonated from the vibrating metal. The sound was painfully dissonant. He stroked one marble against the tuning rod. Eventually, the metal stilled, and the marble vibrated in its stead. When he dropped it in the saline, it twirled against the perimeter of the glass autonomously. 6.5 marbles later, their profane alchemy was evidently ready for use. For whatever it's worth, a high-pitched shriek exploded from the 7th marble when they severed it with the butcher's knife. I wish I had just closed my eyes.
Daphne pulled the navy blue comfortable off the silhouette as Hawthorne approached me, beaker in hand. There was a giant wooden mold underneath the blanket, something you'd use if you were trying to make a human-sized, human-shaped cookie. It was almost full, just needed a little more at the very top. A cauldron of teeth and bone and fat and hair, chilled and fresh because of the freezer-like appliances below the bed frame, and it had all come from me. Hawthorne set the beaker on the floor beside me, put a fingernail under my chin, and manually pivoted my neck so I would meet his beady gaze. "Please know that I'm sorry," he whispered. The doctor nudged the glass directly under me. Before long, I bloomed. Tumors began cropping up all over my body. My belly, the back of my neck, the top of my foot, between my shoulder blades, and so on. My skin stretched until it split. I tasted copper. Daphne pruned me with a pair of garden shears. Hawthorne just used a scalpel. My sundered flesh plopped against the inside of a nearby bucket. When they'd collected their fill, Hawthorne pulled a beaker out from under me. My body cooled. Daphne poured the contents of the bucket into the mold. David was complete. They even had a little of me left over, I think. Everything began to spin. I heard Daphne ask, "Do you think David will understand? Do you think he'll like his new body?" From somewhere in the room, Hawthorne had procured a chunk of dark red meat, glistening with frost. A heart, maybe. He pushed it into the mold. "Of course he will," Hawthorne replied, lighting a match. "He's our son."
The doctor tossed the match into my archived flesh. The mold instantly erupted with a silver flame. A guttural, inhuman moan emanated from the mercurial conflagration. A figure rose from the fire. Thankfully, before I could truly understand what I was looking at, I once again succumbed to a merciful darkness. I woke up in the same spot some time later, untied, wounds hastily sutured. There was an IV in my arm. Above me, the last drops of a blood transfusion moved through the tubing. One of 3, it would seem, judging by the 2 other empty bags hanging from the steel IV pole. I found my clothes folded neatly beneath the chair, my cell phone lying on top, fully charged. As if tased, I sprang from the chair, crying, pacing, scratching myself, mumbling wordlessly. Aftershocks from the night before, no doubt. When I'd settled enough to think, I'd throw on my clothes, flipped open my phone, and almost made a call. I was one tap away from calling my dad when something began clicking in my head. A realization too grotesque to be true. I steadied the bedroom. The alchemical supplies were gone. The posters, the trophies, the photos, they were gone too. For some reason, maybe in their haste, they'd left the wooden mold. It was empty, save for a light dusting of silver ash. I sped home, hoping, wishing, praying to God that I wouldn't find something when I searched. Both my parents were at work when I arrived. I sprinted through our foyer, up the stairs, down the hall, and entered my bedroom. I knocked against my bed frame. It was hollow, sure, but that didn't prove anything. I ran my fingertips across the oak. Nothing. Smooth. Featureless. There's no way, I told myself. There's just no way. Dad worked hard and got promoted. That's it. My bed was pressed against the wall. I still had to examine the last side. The frame screeched as I pulled, as if beseeching me not to check. I felt one of the sutures over my stomach pop from the exertion, but it didn't slow my pace, and, if anything, the pain was welcome. Halfway across the normally concealed side, I noticed a slit in the wood. I pushed on it, and a hidden compartment clicked open. When I pointed my phone light into the hole, there it was. A small glass of saline with a single red marble in it, right under where I laid my head to rest, spinning, spinning, spinning. And if I squinted, if I really focused, I could see an image superimposed on top of what I was actually seeing, but it wasn't static anymore. No more lines, no more cracks, no more cobwebs. The image was constantly changing. A window to David's eyes, one I don't think I'll ever be able to close.